My name's Alex Monroe. I live in a sleepy suburb outside Portland, Oregon, where everyone minds their own business and days pass like lukewarm coffee. Nothing too bitter, nothing too sweet. I work part-time at a local bookstore called Whispers and Pages, which sounds more mysterious than it really is. Most of my shifts are slow, filled with the hum of overhead lights and the quiet turning of pages. I'm 27, single, and still figuring life out, whatever that means. I wouldn't call my life exciting, but I get by. Rent's high, my car makes a weird noise when I turn left, and my fridge is always just one day from empty. Still, I've always believed in kindness. The kind that doesn't make headlines. The kind that looks like returning a shopping cart for an old lady or bringing in a neighbor's mail when they're away. The kind that feels like small bricks in a foundation you're not even sure you're building. Every evening after work, I'd walk the cracked sidewalk back home, headphones in, coffee in hand. Apartment 1B, that's me. And right across the hall, in 1A lived Mr. Walter Thompson. An old man with silver hair, crisp plaid shirts, and eyes that had seen decades I couldn't imagine. We rarely spoke beyond polite nods, the occasional good morning, or weather's holding. He seemed like the kind of man who kept to himself out of habit, not dislike. Quiet, composed, and always with his dog, Max. Now, Max was something else. A golden retriever with a silver-streaked muzzle and eyes full of soul. You could tell just by looking at him that he'd been someone's best friend for a long time. He never barked without reason, never lunged or jumped. Just calm, steady loyalty in a golden coat. One Wednesday evening in late April, I was climbing the stairs when I saw Mr. Thompson struggling with his keys. He fumbled, then dropped them. I jogged over, picked them up, and offered a quick smile. "You all right, sir?" He nodded, almost embarrassed. "Just these old hands of mine. They don't always follow orders." That was the first time we really spoke. He asked if I worked nearby. I told him about the bookstore. He nodded like it made perfect sense. Then, as I turned to go inside, he paused and said something unexpected. "You like dogs, Alex?" I blinked. "Yeah. I mean, who doesn't?" He gave a short chuckle. "Max needs a little extra attention this week. I've got to take a few medical appointments downtown, long waits, early mornings. Thought I'd ask if you'd mind checking in on him now and then." I didn't even think twice. Of course. I'd be happy to. And just like that, I had a new responsibility. It started small. Letting Max out in the morning. Making sure his bowl was full. Taking him for short walks around the block when Mr. Thompson's back was acting up. Max took to me quickly. He'd greet me with a tail wag and that gentle thump of his head against my leg, as if saying, "Thanks for showing up." Over the next few days, I began noticing things. Subtle, quiet things. There was a room in Mr. Thompson's apartment that was always locked. No big deal, it was his home, after all, but I once saw him coming out of it, shutting the door quickly when he realized I'd noticed. Inside, I caught a glimpse of a green military trunk and what looked like stacks of old files. He didn't say anything, and I didn't ask. But I remembered. Max, too, was no ordinary dog. He responded to German commands. When I said Platz, he'd drop instantly to the floor. He never begged for food, never barked at other animals. And every night, without fail, he would sit in front of that locked door for at least 10 minutes, almost like he was guarding it. One morning, while Mr. Thompson was at the hospital, Max got agitated. He pawed at the door, whining low in his throat. I knelt beside him, unsure what was going on. "You miss him, huh?" I murmured. He stared at the door like it held the answer to every question I hadn't asked. That day stuck with me. It wasn't just that Max missed his owner. It was the way he stared at that room, like there was something he was waiting for. My curiosity began to tangle with my routine. Who was Mr. Thompson before he became just another quiet neighbor? What was in that room? And why had he asked me, of all people, to help with Max? One night, I helped Mr. Thompson carry groceries upstairs. As we reached his door, he paused. "You're good with him," he said. "Max? He's a good dog." "No," he said quietly. "You understand loyalty. Not many people do anymore." I nodded, unsure what to say. There was something behind his voice, a weight, like those words meant more than they sounded. And then came the moment I'd remember forever. He turned the key to his apartment, opened the door, and looked at me. "Come by tomorrow. There's something I want to show you." I hesitated. "Sure, anything specific?" He just smiled. "You'll see." It was said so simply, but I felt the shift in my gut. Something was coming. I didn't know what, but I knew that whatever ordinary life I thought I had, it was already changing. I showed up at Mr. Thompson's door the next morning at exactly 9 a.m., Max wagging his tail beside me like he already knew something was different. When I knocked, there was no answer. Just a taped note on the door in his neat, looping cursive. "Door's open. I'm in the study. Come in, Alex." I opened the door and stepped into the familiar quiet of his apartment. Everything was as it had always been. Immaculate, old-world furniture, the scent of coffee, and something like cedarwood. But today, the door that had always been locked was open. I stepped closer, unsure if I was even allowed. Max trotted in ahead of me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Inside, the room was dimly lit. Heavy curtains hung over the windows, letting in slits of gold light. There were shelves of old books, framed black and white photos, and in the middle, a large oak desk with a single worn trunk sitting beside it. Mr. Thompson sat behind the desk, sorting through some yellowed papers. He looked up and nodded. "Close the door behind you, will you?" I did. "I don't let many people in here," he said, tapping the desk gently. "But Max trusts you. That tells me something." He motioned toward the trunk. "Go ahead. Open it." I hesitated, then knelt and unlatched it. The hinges creaked as it opened. Inside were dozens of items, photos, medals, patches, notebooks. I picked up a black and white picture. A younger version of Mr. Thompson stood beside a military helicopter. His face looked the same, calm, focused, serious. "You were in the army?" I asked.
"Special Forces," he said.
"Long time ago. Before Portland, before retirement, before arthritis became my most loyal companion." I nodded slowly, sifting through the box. A few letters caught my eye. Government seals, red stamps that read classified, now faded. He leaned forward. "I'm telling you this because I don't have much time left. Doctor says I might have a few good months, maybe less. That's not a surprise. I've lived more than most. But what matters now is making sure something important ends up in the right hands." I looked at him, confused. "What does that have to do with me?" He smiled faintly. "Everything." Over the next hour, he told me stories I wasn't sure I believed. Missions that never made the news. Files that never existed. Max, he said, was more than a pet. He was trained by military handlers, used in covert recovery ops, rescued after a mission in Kosovo. But even he was retired, Mr. Thompson added, reaching over to scratch Max behind the ears. He handed me an envelope, thick, sealed with wax. "If something happens to me, open this." I didn't know what to say. "Why me?" He paused, eyes heavy. "Because you didn't ask for anything. You just helped. No angle. No motive. That's rare." A few days passed. Life fell back into routine, but the routine felt different. He didn't talk much after that day, though we shared quiet coffee in the mornings while Max lay between us like a silent bridge. Then came the night everything changed. It was just past 10 p.m. when I heard the crash. A loud thud followed by Max's sharp bark. I bolted from my apartment and found Mr. Thompson on the floor, clutching his chest. Max whined beside him, nudging his shoulder. I called 911, my hands trembling as I gave them the address. The ambulance came fast. The paramedics worked in silence, efficient and focused. One of them looked up at me before they wheeled him out and said, "Your family?" I hesitated. "Neighbor." She nodded. "He asked for you. Told us to make sure you get this." She handed me a small key and pointed to the envelope Mr. Thompson had given me days earlier, now lying on the floor beside the open trunk. I picked it up, heart pounding. My fingers shook as I turned it over. When they took him away, I stood there in the middle of his apartment, the weight of everything finally pressing in. Max looked at me with the same stillness I'd seen in Mr. Thompson. as if he knew things I didn't. I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a legal document. The letter read, "Alex, if you're reading this, it means I've run out of time. Everything I have, this apartment, my savings, what little is left of my pension, it's yours now. But more importantly, Max is yours. Take care of him, the way you've taken care of me.
Don't ask why.
Just trust that you earned this in a way no amount of blood or family ties ever could. I've made arrangements with my attorney, who will contact you. The key opens the safety deposit box downtown. Use it wisely." I couldn't breathe for a moment. This wasn't just kindness. It was a legacy, a gift, a mystery still unfolding. I sat down on his old recliner, Max curling up beside me, his head on my foot like he'd always belonged there. The following morning, a sharply dressed man named James Delaney knocked on my door. "Mr. Monroe? I'm Mr. Thompson's lawyer. May I come in?" I nodded, still stunned. He opened a briefcase and placed a small stack of documents on the table. "Mr. Thompson's will was updated just 6 weeks ago. You, Mr. Monroe, are listed as his sole heir." I looked at him like he'd spoken another language. There must be some mistake. "No mistake," he said gently. He was very clear. He said, and I quote, "Alex has the heart I hope someone in my family would have. But he was never my blood, he was better." That line shattered something in me. And suddenly, this quiet life of mine wasn't so quiet anymore. I didn't sleep much that night. The lawyer, James Delaney, had left after walking me through a dense forest of legal language, explaining in calm, precise terms how the apartment, Mr. Thompson's modest but well-managed savings, and something significant locked in a downtown safety deposit box were now legally mine. All because I fed a dog. Because I showed up. The thing is, it wasn't just about the inheritance. It was what the letter said, that I was better than blood. That line kept echoing in my head, louder than any siren, more unsettling than any twist I could have imagined. Why me? I sat on the edge of my couch, the sealed key and the envelope laid out on the coffee table like puzzle pieces I hadn't figured out how to place. Max lay curled at my feet, lifting his head every so often to look at me with those deep, knowing eyes. There was more to this. I could feel it in my bones. The next morning, I called out of work and took Max for a long walk around the neighborhood. As I walked past the bookstore, I realized how small my world had been before all of this. How routine had replaced risk. And how now, suddenly, everything felt different. I wasn't just mourning Mr. Thompson. I was mourning the simplicity I'd taken for granted. Later that afternoon, I headed to the bank downtown with the key Mr. Thompson had left me. The vault room was colder than I expected, and the clerk who escorted me wore a perfectly neutral expression, as if this happened every day. He opened box number 421 with the key and handed it to me. Inside was a small black notebook, a velvet pouch, and a sealed manila folder. I opened the pouch first. Inside was a Rolex watch, worn but still elegant, and an old military coin engraved with the words, "For honor, not glory." Then I opened the notebook. It was filled with dates, names, places. Not diary entries, more like field logs. Pages and pages of shorthand codes, strange abbreviations, sketches of locations that seemed vaguely foreign. On the inside of the back cover was a note scribbled in red ink. "If anything happens to me, they'll look for this. Hide it. Share it only if absolutely necessary. And if someone asks about Berlin, lie." I stared at the words. Berlin? The final item, the manila folder, was heavier than it looked. Inside was a photograph of a much younger Mr. Thompson standing with 3 men in front of what looked like a demolished building. On the back, a name was written in pencil, Krieger. There were also letters with thick red stamps, DOD headers, all redacted to near nothing. One envelope held a list of wire transfers with unfamiliar names and offshore banks. A sticky note was attached. "They thought I buried this. Now it's yours. Be careful who you trust." My fingers trembled as I closed the box and slid it back into the metal drawer. This wasn't just a gift. This was a secret. A dangerous one. I walked out of the bank with a notebook stuffed in my coat and Max trailing beside me, calm as ever. He kept glancing up at me, sensing the shift in energy. He always did. I stopped by a park bench, sat down, and stared straight ahead. I had decisions to make. Serious ones. First, I needed to understand what I had in my hands. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about whatever Mr. Thompson had been involved in. He hadn't chosen a relative for a reason. He chose someone who had no ties, no trail, no baggage.
Me.
Second, I had to make a call. Bury the truth and live comfortably, or dig deeper and risk being pulled into something I might not come back from. That night, I invited James Delaney over to talk again. He agreed without hesitation, arriving promptly with the same composed professionalism he always carried. "I need to ask you something," I said, after showing him the notebook and the redacted files. His eyes widened for the first time. He adjusted his glasses slowly, processing what he saw. "I assumed it was something like this," he said quietly. "Walter never told me details, but he always said if he ever disappeared, someone would eventually come looking."
Who?
I asked. He looked at me seriously. "Not the kind of people who send invitations." I leaned back in my chair. "And now I'm holding the secret." He nodded. "That's why he chose you. No one would suspect you. No one would look at a bookstore clerk and think you were holding the kind of truth people bury bodies to protect." Max suddenly stood up and growled. His eyes focused on the door. A shadow passed across the frosted glass. We both froze. I crept toward the door, heart pounding in my ears. When I flung it open, the hallway was empty. But taped to the outside, a single white envelope with one word written in thick black ink. "Return." I brought it inside, opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph of me holding the notebook earlier that day. The image had been taken from across the street, through a glass window. Someone was watching. I turned to Delaney. "What now?" He looked at me grimly. "Now you decide. Walk away and hope they believe you never saw anything. Or keep digging and find out what Walter died protecting." I looked at Max, who stared up at me like he already knew what choice I'd make. And in that moment, I knew walking away was no longer an option. 3 days after receiving the envelope with the photograph, I was no longer sleeping at home. I bounced between cheap motels on the outskirts of Portland, each one seedier than the last, never staying more than a night. I left my phone in the river. I paid only in cash. I even began to change my walking patterns, switching sidewalks, doubling back, taking alleyways I used to avoid. Max stayed close. Always alert. Always watching. Something had shifted in me. Fear had given way to resolve. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore, I needed answers. I needed to understand what Walter Thompson had buried so deeply that even in death, he couldn't let it rest. I remembered the name scribbled on the photo from the deposit box. Krieger. I spent a night at the downtown public library pouring through archived articles, dusty microfilm, and obscure records. Nothing. No obituaries, no military profiles, no LinkedIn pages. Krieger might as well have been a ghost. But then I tried something else. I searched through old war crime tribunal reports, declassified CIA files, and blacklisted contractor lists. And there it was, tucked into the footnotes of a redacted intelligence memo from 1998. Subject: Krieger, alias Jonas K., believed to be former operative attached to Operation Ember. Unconfirmed reports of defection post-Berlin collapse. Potential asset turned mercenary. Status unknown. Operation Ember. That was the word Mr. Thompson had underlined several times in his notebook. Ember wasn't just some military campaign. It was a covert mission that had gone sideways, possibly involving betrayal, hidden assets, and disappeared agents. I finally realized this wasn't just a hand-me-down mystery. This was unfinished business. Back at the motel that night, someone slipped another note under my door. "You're looking in the wrong places. We should talk. Parking garage. 3rd and Elm. Midnight. Come alone. Bring the dog." There was no signature, just a symbol, a triangle with a circle drawn through it. The same symbol was scratched on the final page of Walter's notebook. Midnight came fast. The garage was nearly empty, quiet except for the low hum of a flickering light overhead. I waited with Max beside me, heart pounding, every sound magnified tenfold. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped out. Late 50s, military posture, trench coat, eyes sharp like he never stopped analyzing. "Alex Monroe?" he asked. "Who's asking?" "My name's Richard Kane. I worked with Walter. Back in the days when men didn't live long enough to retire." He tossed me a flash drive. "That's what they're after. It was supposed to stay buried. But Walter must have passed it on. You were never meant to be part of this." "I didn't ask to be." He looked at Max. "You trust the dog. You live longer." I swallowed hard. "Who's Krieger?" His face darkened. The beginning of the end. He was one of us. Brilliant. Dangerous. But then he went rogue, sold information, agents' names, entire Black Ops rosters to the highest bidder. Ember was meant to stop him. And did it? "No," Kane said, voice flat. "It went wrong."
Real wrong.
Half the team died. Krieger vanished. Walter was one of the few who got out alive, but not without cost. He stepped closer. "The flash drive has files Krieger thought were destroyed. Financial trails, transactions, government deals that shouldn't exist. Walter kept it hidden all these years." "So what now?" I asked. "I give it to you, and I get to disappear?" Kane gave a humorless laugh. "It doesn't work like that. If they know you have it, they'll never stop." "Then help me finish it," I said. "Help me expose them." He shook his head. "You don't get it, kid. There's no exposing them. The people protecting Krieger now, they are the system." I looked down at Max, who stared ahead with that same alert stillness. "Then what did Walter die for?" That made Kane pause. For a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, maybe. Or regret. He pulled out a burner phone and handed it to me. "There's a secure line. Call this number when you're ready to make a move. But once you do, there's no going back." Then he turned and walked away. Back at the motel, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. It took me an hour to decrypt, using a code embedded in the final lines of Walter's notebook. What I found chilled me. Names. Hundreds of names. Government agents, foreign operatives, corrupt financiers, private military companies tied to missing journalists, dead whistleblowers, and dismantled peace talks. Every page of that flash drive was blood and betrayal disguised as diplomacy. I realized then, Walter didn't just leave me a legacy. He left me a weapon. Suddenly, Max perked up. He growled, moving toward the window. Someone was outside. I killed the lights. Peered through the curtain. A black sedan. Tinted windows. No plates. My stomach dropped. They'd found me. I grabbed Max, the notebook, the flash drive, and my backpack, and fled through the back stairwell, heart racing, footsteps echoing like war drums. Max moved with precision, never once hesitating. We were ghosts in the night. By the time the first bullet shattered the motel lobby window, we were already in the alley and gone. That was the night I stopped being the man who walked dogs and stocked paperbacks. That was the night I became the man Walter believed I could be. It's been 6 months since the night bullets cracked glass and silence turned to chaos. 6 months since I ran from a motel room with nothing but a dog, a notebook, and the last pieces of a dead man's war. Now I sit in a cabin tucked deep in the Oregon forest, the kind of place that doesn't show up on Google Maps. It belongs to no one, and that's exactly how I like it. The world thinks Alex Monroe disappeared. And in many ways, I did. But let me back up. After I escaped the motel, I lived off-grid, moved through cities using aliases, traveled at night, paid with cash. I changed phones weekly, switched routes every day. Paranoia became a skill, not a flaw. The flash drive, that tiny rectangle of secrets, was a burning coal in my pocket. I didn't want to carry it, but I couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. Not after what I saw. Eventually, I reached out to Kane again. I told him I didn't want to just survive, I wanted to end it. Not with more violence, but with exposure. Walter's death had to mean something. The truth couldn't stay buried beneath suits and speeches. Kane hesitated, but he agreed. He connected me to someone he trusted, a former intelligence analyst turned investigative journalist named Rachel Kim. She worked deep undercover, publishing only under a pseudonym, protected by digital shields thicker than Fort Knox. We met in a parking garage in San Francisco. I brought Max. He always came. Rachel wasn't what I expected. Young.
Sharp.
Fire in her eyes and no patience for ceremony. "You know they'll come after you," she said, plugging the flash drive into a secure laptop. "People have vanished for less." "Then make it worth it," I said. "Burn down their walls." And she did. Over the next 4 weeks, Rachel and her team at the anonymous collective Torchlight sifted through every file, every encrypted trail, every offshore ledger. They fact-checked. They verified. They cross-referenced death certificates with black-budget operations. They didn't just leak a scandal. They detonated it. On a cold Thursday morning in March, Torchlight published Operation Ember, The Shadow Game. The report broke the internet within hours. Front-page stories. International news coverage. Government press conferences filled with panicked denial. Names were named. Faces were exposed. And Krieger?
Gone.
The ghost vanished again, this time without a trace. But his empire cracked. There were consequences. Several high-ranking officials resigned. A private military contractor was quietly dismantled. Bank accounts were frozen. Public outrage boiled. Protests formed. But let's not pretend it was a movie ending. The machine didn't fall. It never does. It just learned my name. That's why I vanished. I couldn't go back to the bookstore. Couldn't walk Max through the same park. Couldn't pretend life hadn't changed when I now carried the weight of every secret Walter trusted me to guard. But something else happened too. People started sending letters to Torchlight. Survivors. Whistleblowers. Relatives of men and women who had disappeared. And in every message there was a theme. Thank you for what you did. And that's when I finally understood what Walter meant by better than blood. He wasn't rewarding me.
He was recruiting me.
Walter saw something in me that I had ignored for years. That quietness in me wasn't a flaw. It was a shield. My life of solitude wasn't meaningless. It made me invisible. And in a world built on noise, invisibility was power. So now I stay hidden. But not idle. Kane still checks in. Rachel sends encrypted updates. And every now and then I leave another tip for Torchlight. Just enough to keep the fire alive. Max is older now. His fur's turning silver around the muzzle. But he still patrols the cabin like a soldier, always alert, always loyal. He's more than a dog. He's the last piece of Walter I still carry. The one soul who knows the full truth. Sometimes I sit on the porch, coffee in hand, notebook on my lap. Not Walter's.
Mine.
I've started writing it all down. Not for the world, but for the day I'm no longer here. Someone might need it, just like I did. And when that day comes, I hope they'll understand what I didn't at first. That the smallest acts, feeding a dog, sharing a meal, offering kindness, can echo far beyond what we see. Walter Thompson didn't just leave me property or secrets. He left me a mission. And I accepted it. So if you're reading this and someone hands you a key, or a notebook, or a dog that seems too loyal for his own good, don't dismiss it. You never know what you're stepping into. You never know who's watching. And you never know what legacy is waiting to be passed on.